Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome in. Soccer Morning on the air, backheel.com. Thank you very much for joining us here on a beautiful Wednesday. Well, I hope it's beautiful no matter where you are. It's certainly somewhat better than it was just yesterday for the U.S. men's national team, at least on the senior level. The U23 something of a different story. That, of course, is going to be our lead story today. We do have Brian Sciaretta from American Soccer Now lined up to discuss the things going on in the U.S. soccer program on the men's side with a very busy day yesterday. Super Tuesday was what I called it. I got to come up with a better name than that. It's over now, so now it doesn't matter as much. But it certainly was a momentous day for the United States on the soccer field, and we'll get to that right now as we go through some of the news ahead of Brian Sciaretta joining us. We'll also, of course, take your phone calls. Plenty of time for you to react to the way things went down yesterday. The U.S. men's national team avoids disaster, beats Guatemala 4-0 in Columbus, Ohio. Dempsey, Cameron, Zusi, and Altidore all score in the American win. The Americans leapfrog Guatemala, move into second place in Group C in the fourth round of CONCACAF World Cup qualifying. Dempsey, Bradley, Beckerman leading the way with very good performances. And the United States men's national team remains unbeaten in Columbus. The 17-year-old Borussia Dortmund midfielder Christian Pulisic, who we heard on the broadcast, wants his name pronounced Pulisic, made his U.S. men's national team senior level debut, which capsized him to the United States, so everybody can exhale on the possibility of Christian Pulisic, who pronounces his name that way because he's American, by the way, will not be playing for Croatia. This was not exactly, the performance we expected. Whether or not it makes everything better is a different question. Of course, it doesn't. And we'll get into some of that later on in the program. The US U23s, meanwhile, because everything is not hunky-dory in the land of American soccer, fell 2-1 to Colombia in Frisco, Texas, 3-2 on aggregate, over two legs in the Olympic qualifying playoff. Colombia took the lead in the 30th minute on a goal by Roger Martinez. Americans briefly leveled and actually looked pretty good for a little while. Diver. Machado headed the ball into his own net. It's not a name I recognize very well. Another Roger Martinez goal sealed the U.S. fate and led to an emotional meltdown that saw a couple of second-half red cards. Luis Gil, Matt Miazga sent off for accumulating 2 yellow cards each. Not a strong mental performance by the side as they went down the stretch of that game. The United States will now miss out on a second consecutive Olympic tournament. First time that's happened since the 60s, I think 64 and 68, although that was a different era in men's soccer in the Olympics. Back then, senior level teams took part. The rule, that makes this a U23 tournament went into effect in 1992. So clearly, the first time the United States has missed a tournament at that level ever once that rule went into place. We'll talk more about what this failure means with Brian Sciaretta. And again, whether or not we have some sort of mental issue within the American soccer program, because if you watch the end of that match last night, it was pretty shameful the way the Americans handled themselves. I'm not saying Colombia didn't add to the problems on some level, but you have to shift a lot of the blame to the way that those kids, Luis Gil among them, although he did not necessarily make the kind of contact that merited a second yellow card, but you have to be better than that in those moments. Mexico downed Canada 2-0 at the Estadio Azteca to book their place in the Hex. Yep, they're already through. Andres Guardado gave Mexico an early lead on a penalty kick, and Tecatito Corona doubled the advantage just before halftime. It seemed to be a yeoman's boring performance from Mexico by all accounts. I did not watch that game, but based on what my timeline was telling me, it seems as though Mexico went through their business without breaking much of a sweat as they beat Canada. Canada now in some serious trouble after some other results in the region, which I'll get to momentarily. Argentinian defender Martin Di Michelis has been charged by the English FA with betting offenses. A worldwide ban on soccer for all of those on betting on soccer for all those involved in the game went into effect in August of 2014. DeMichaelis has until 5 p.m. on April 5th to respond to the charges. The quote from the FA, it is alleged the player committed 12 breaches of FA Rule E8 concerning football matches between the 22nd of January 2016 and the 28th of January 2016. This is interesting. Rule E8 from the FA states, a participant shall not bet, either directly or indirectly, or instruct, permit, cause, or enable any person to bet on the result, progress, conduct, or any other aspect or occurrence in a football match or competition. Any other matter concerning or relating to football anywhere in the world, including, for example, without limitation, the transfer of players, employment of managers, team selection, or disciplinary matters. Basically, anything that a player might have some inside knowledge on, you're not allowed to bet on it. But you're not allowed to bet on the game, period, and we'll see how Martin DeMichaelis handles these charges as levied by the FA. Other results from around the globe: CONCACAF World Cup qualifying in other places. TNT, Trinidad and Tobago, 6-0 winners over St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Honduras, 2-0 winners over El Salvador. Panama, 1-0 over Haiti. Costa Rica, 3-0 over Jamaica. In CONMEBOL. In South America, Paraguay, 2-2 with Brazil. They're actually up 2-0 in that game. I'm sure our friend Roberto in Connecticut is wishing they held on, but that's a decent result for the Paraguayans. Colombia, 3-1 over Ecuador. Uruguay, 1-0 over Peru. Argentina, 2-0 over Bolivia. 50th goal of his career for Lionel Messi in that game. Venezuela losing 1-4 or 4-1 to Chile at home, the only home side to fall on the night. Friendlies: England falling 2-1 to the Netherlands at home. Portugal beating Belgium 2-1. France beating Russia 4-2. That French team is something to watch. Germany 4-1 over Italy. Obviously, you know all about the German threat as those teams all get ready for the European Championships this summer. You had a couple of other qualifiers, friendlies in Europe. You had a bunch of games in Africa. African Nations Cup qualifying, which delivered a couple of interesting results. 3-3 Algeria and Ethiopia. Senegal beating Niger, Liberia 5-0 over Djibouti. That's pretty interesting. Egypt 1-0 over Nigeria. That's the return leg after that crazy. Everybody see that? Did you see those pictures of the I don't know how big the stadium was. It was definitely not big enough to hold the number of people that were in it. But people on the scaffolding, on the light stanchions, pretty crazy stuff. All right. Good chance for us to step aside here and grab Brian Sciaretta. From American Soccer Now, we'll go over the United States performance in Columbus, the United States performance in Frisco, Texas. We'll talk about Jurgen Klinsmann, Andy Herzog, the players involved. It's Soccer Morning. It's backheel.com. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we are back. Had two results for the U.S. men's national team program, both at the senior level and at the U23 level last night. Those games happening in Columbus, Ohio, and Frisco, Texas, respectively. Brian Sciaretta from American Soccer Now joins us. He was in Columbus. He's on his way home or just got back, imagine, at some point in the recent couple of hours from Columbus. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing very well, Jason.
We are, okay, so obviously everything kind of hinged on what happened Friday in Guatemala City, Brian. A 2-0 loss for the United States. Pretty damaging to Klinsmann's reputation, certainly troubling from the perspective the United States hadn't lost to Guatemala since 1988. It demanded a response, and we got one, and yet I'm still left a little cold by that. Is that fair?
Oh, it's completely fair. I mean, look, I don't think American fans or the media or players or even any, neutral observers are going to be at the point where, a win over a Guatemalan team that didn't even feature Ruiz or Papa is going to rectify everything, particularly at home. I mean, this is a team that the U.S. team, before the last two games before this, has defeated Guatemala by a combined score of 10-0 on home soil. I mean, Guatemala is not the team it was, I think, back in the late 90s when it looked like it could be going the way of Honduras, as a World Cup contender. It's not that kind of a program. It's a pretty poor team, and last night they showed just how poor they are. And I don't think, CONCACAF is a very forgiving region where, I think sometimes you can be lured into a false sense of security and you can, and problems within the team can get really whitewashed. Either way too. I mean, like Mexico almost didn't qualify and then they looked fine at the World Cup last time. So it's a weird region. I just think the status quo is preserved. I mean, Jurgen's not going to get fired over this. But at the same point, I don't think anyone's going to feel really good about the team either, still. It's going to take the Copa America to really kind of transform people's viewpoints in terms of seeing how the U.S. can do against, real competition, against the kind of teams that they strive to be.
It's the win in very nuts and bolts fashion sort of, I'm not going to say saves the World Cup qualification campaign, although, so much doom and gloom ahead of the match last night. If they lose this one, they're effectively out of the World Cup, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it seemed very unlikely that was going to happen, and sure enough, they got the job done. So in that sense, this puts them back on the right track. But at the same time, the larger questions for Klinsmann remain. And I mean, do you believe that there's going to be some sort of admission on the part of Klinsmann or U.S. Soccer that, yes, we do have some fundamental problems here with this leadership, or are we just going to keep going ho-hum down the road to see what happens in the Copa America and beyond?
Yeah, I think it's going to be something that's going to be addressed over time, and he's going to be asked about it, too. Because, look, if you look at what really turned the tide for the U.S. team last night, it was Jeff Cameron, Kyle Beckerman, Clint Dempsey, Michael Bradley. It was guys who were, either in their 30s or late 20s. I mean, it was a veteran core. I mean, so what did Jurgen Klinsmann do when his back was against the wall? He went with the veterans, his old reliable hand, and they got the job done against against a team that they should have. I mean, these are guys who've played the game at the highest level, at the World Cup and at big clubs, and they did what they did what they've done hundreds of times in their career. So in a sense, nothing was learned. I mean, Jurgen, where is this next generation? Where are Jurgen's players coming into the fold and doing this? I mean, there's nothing to really be learned or positively said or make any bold statement saying the team is going in the right direction when you're winning with known commodities that predate his tenure and everything else. So, and then combine that with the 23 loss, where he's the Federation's technical director, you have to start wondering, you can only whitewash over a certain problem so many times with this hand. I mean, eventually Kyle Beckerman's, I'm a big Kyle Beckerman fan. I believe he's a very good player, but at 33, he's already not turning in it's going to Father Time is going to catch up with him eventually, where he's not going to be able to put in these kind of performances. So then what? These are problems that are really going to have to be fixed, because I don't really see this core being able to really carry this team through the next World Cup, or maybe even the Hex.
I'm not sure there's anything more damning when it comes to Klinsmann and his stewardship of this program than the fact that, as you said, instead of having some sort of and look, to me, the argument that the player pool doesn't provide him with the tools necessary is the wrong argument, because as the national team head coach, regardless of what's there, your job is to develop the next generation of players, or at least find a way to bring through players who can then become the core to replace the older generation. And when push comes to shove, his back is up against the wall, and let me use all the cliches I can, Brian, he immediately goes back to that core group that you just identified.
Right, exactly. And look, when you saw the Gold Cup last year, and you hate to keep going back to it, they were being outplayed by teams with players who, their goal was to be in MLS. That's a high point for them. So it's not like they didn't have talent to overcome some of those teams. They did, and they did have that talent, and they didn't do it. So obviously, you wanted to see them win on the road in Guatemala and win games that are a little bit more challenging, not just win the easy games. And look, even if they had won in Guatemala, these questions would still persist. And yes, playing on the road in CONCACAF is very difficult. It's been difficult for every U.S. manager forever. So, and it will always continue to be tricky. But you want to see this. You want to see something else emerge within this team. Something to be like, wow, like I didn't see this before. Klinsmann is supposed to be a different manager. There's a reason why they're paying him a fortune, so much more than any other manager, is because he promised a lot. The expectation should be higher, and right now we're still getting the status quo at best. And so we'll see. I mean, I think the Copa America, because they're not going to be playing in the Confederations Cup, the Copa America is really the chance to learn about this team and what direction it's heading in. And you hope that the U.S. team can do well, but also not just ride the continued the same old hand. You want to see them introduce new players into the fold and have a new stamp and have a new identity. I mean, that's kind of where most American fans thought we would be, 5 years into Clinton's tenure, if you look back and ask people where they would hope back in 2011.
The job is pretty clear. Ahead of them come the next round of qualifying, which I don't think happens until September. So it's a matter of right now trying to salvage something and build something towards Copa America. There are a couple of friendlies ahead of that match, but otherwise Klinsmann's going to have to do all of his tinkering without actually having his team in front of him. Does that just indicate we're going to see essentially this same group, maybe with a couple of additions through health?
Yeah, I mean, I still think you could see Nyazga pop up from the 23s, maybe a couple of the best U23 performers, maybe start making their way into this team too. I think between the current roster and a couple of the U23s and the players who are injured, I think that's where the Copa America team will come from. Now, look, there is still a lot of ways you can play new brand of soccer among the players that from the pools I just mentioned. I mean, where's Darlington Nagbe going to fit in? I mean, he's looked nothing but promising every time he's been on the field for the U.S. team. Is he going to step up and then all of a sudden be able to take a role against a good team like Colombia? There's a lot of different ways that they can handle that.
That's the group, I think, or that's a couple of the one of the players that I identify as a guy that needs to have a bigger role in this team going forward. I know he was only recently naturalized and able to become eligible for the United States, but there seems to be maybe a hesitance on Klinsmann's part to really go for it with some of these players. Look, we know Fabian Johnson's going to be on the field if he's healthy. We know Michael Bradley's got a role in this team if he's healthy, although the question with Michael Bradley has always been about his position, not necessarily his quality, Brian. We know Jeff Cameron should be in this team. regardless of what the situation is, and probably should be at center back. One of the criticism that Klinsmann got ahead of the game was that he didn't have any stability in this team and that he changed things too much. Then they threw up some graphic last night on the broadcast that showed that Bradley and Arena actually changed their lineups nearly as much, or if not more. And then Klinsmann, hearing this stat in the post-game press conference, I believe you were there, it said so much for stability. Now, I think that he's obviously being petulant to me, because that's, regardless of whether or not Bradley or Arena did it, that's not really the issue we're pointing to. Plus, that stat makes no mention of how many changes per lineup. It just says different lineups, and that could be one change. And it doesn't really address the major factor that we've talked about, which is the pairings and the partnerships that have lacked stability in this team.
Well, look, stability is not just lineup changes. Stability is tactics, formations, and like you said perfectly, combinations and players' roles within the team. I mean, in 2013, I one time asked Jeff Cameron where he was going to be playing this cycle. It was ahead of the Belgium game in Cleveland. And he said, I was brought into this camp to play center back. And then he starts the next day against Belgium at right back. And it's, so there's a lot of different things that go into stability. And I think it's, players knowing what to expect when they get into camp. Because national teams meet so infrequently.
Exactly.
Klinsmann always talks about getting players out of their comfort zone. I'm kind of of the belief that, you almost need to be in your comfort zone with the national team because you're together so short. I mean, you have to you come together, once every couple months, and there really is tough. It's a tough time to learn. I mean, you only have a couple days before each game. It's nice if they could come in knowing what to expect and hit the ball running, as opposed to, learning their roles and how they're going to play up against this team, learning what position they're going to play heading into each game. And, and it's still a mystery as to how, and how much players know and how much they're comfortable and how much they're aware of what to expect going into camp. I mean, some players have touched on this more than others.
Yeah, Brian, I had the chance to talk to Landon Donovan yesterday ahead of the game, and that was specifically...
Great interview, by the way.
Thank you. Something specifically that he mentioned, that he said the guys he's talked to, and he's not going to name names, and really this isn't about internal turmoil at this point, although maybe there's a story there. But he spoke about guys saying, look, there isn't any stability. They don't know what to expect, and that's clearly impacting how they play out there. I mean, I think that what's more frustrating than anything, and what might bother me as a player, whether I was a consistent starter or a guy who just got a shot every now and then, is sometimes these players are raked across the coals for their performances in games and in situations in which they are not put in the best position to succeed. And how can you trust your coach? How can you trust the program to make you look good if there isn't a clear notion that they're going to give you an assignment that you understand before you step foot on the field?
Yeah, I mean, I know you do match ratings too, like me. And like when you see like DeAndre Edlin struggling at right midfielder, like he did against Guatemala in Guatemala, it stinks to give him a bad grade because you really feel like, you're punishing a guy for, a position that he doesn't play. I mean, the amount of times he's played it for his club, I can probably count on one hand. And the amount of times, I mean, even now he's playing all right back for Sunderland. And it's tough. I mean, but again, you kind of hope that, for example, things could stabilize out. Like, if DeAndre Edlin could earn the trust of Klinsmann to play in that back line, because it's a big responsibility. Klinsmann does put emphasis on the back line, being able to control, being able to not losing your defensive responsibilities. And the same thing with Castillo on the left. Castillo, and he's always been seen as defensively suspect. So if he can play at left back, think about how good that is. I mean, then all of a sudden you can move Fabian Johnson into the midfield. Because I think the reason why he's playing left back is because Klinsmann doesn't like any of the options else back there. So, you think about it, like it's bit by bit, you kind of hope that things get solved and they find options that work for them. I think it's also a trust factor that Klinsmann wants to have with his players too, like I was mentioning in the back line, and And right back has been kind of a hole too since Cherundolo retired. I mean, like Timothy Chandler's looked poor a lot of times. Brad Evans, there's another guy playing out of position. He's not a right back. And then DeAndre Yedlin, and it's really kind of it's just a complicated time. But you kind of hope that with these small little big performances, if they can keep it up, if all of a sudden Castillo and Yedlin can answer these questions against maybe a Colombia, then there's fewer question marks on the team, and it's probably going to be able to bring about a little bit more stability. Yeah. I think that's the best case scenario for the U.S. team is seeing bit by bit some of these players step in and fill these roles, particularly at the roles that are big question marks for the team.
We'll come to the U23s momentarily, but there are a couple of players in the senior squad who were eligible for the U23s that didn't play with them. DeAndre Yedlin's one of them. John Brooks obviously picked up an injury, and he wasn't going to be available for anybody in these games.
Pulisic, yeah.
And then Christian Pulisic, who made his senior level debut and is now cap tied to the United States. Everybody can exhale on that one. Brian, every time we talk about it, you told me there's basically no indication that he wanted to play for anybody but the United States, Croatia being the other option. But this is done now, and he's cap tied, and now do we have an immediate notion of what the future is for Christian Pulisic? Does it depend on how much time he gets at Dortmund? Because it's great to cap tie a 17-year-old, but that says nothing about whether or not he's going to continue to be in this team.
No, it doesn't, and it doesn't. And you don't know if he's going to continue to be in Dortmund's team.
Right.
The Dortmund has a lot of great players there too, and he needs to play. I mean, you can't just have him on that first team and getting like 5 minutes here and there every other week. I mean, it's great. It's an honor to be a part of a team like Dortmund, but that's not going to do anything by way of his development. It was great. It was good to see him. I like to think that they did it not just for cap tying. I mean, I think that's predatory cap tying is a term when you use just to cap tie somebody, just like almost like a dog marking its territory, and that over the long term doesn't bode well for future dual nationals if they think you're doing it. The less likely. But look, I mean, Clinton, there's obviously some legitimate curiosity in seeing where Pulisic is at this stage too. But look, I mean, he's going to have ups and he's going to have downs. I mean, there's going to be times when he's not playing. He's going to have to come through barriers and he's going to have to break through them like every other young player. And it's tough to pencil him as being a regular key part of this team, and a guy who can contribute, consistently make an impact. I think it's one of these guys where you bring him in time to time, and if it works out, good. But he still has the U20 World Cup next year, and he still has the next Olympics, which he's also eligible for, the next U23 team. Think about it, that's how young he is.
Right.
So, there's a big, long future for him. I mean, this is the first cap, and I'm sure it'll be one of many. But but it's way too early to know what to expect. I mean, if you go back and look at what people were predicting for Julian Green and even Gideon Zelalem, who hasn't even made his debut yet, too. I mean, it was a year ago when Clinton said he was ready for the first team, for the U.S. national team, and that has not come to fruition, and now he's not playing with Rangers. Yeah. So, youth prospects look golden a lot of times, too, and sometimes it doesn't always work out. Now, look, I think Christian, the numbers he put up with Borussia Dortmund's youth teams suggests he's a real, true, bona fide prospect. But, like I said, mentalities change, not just physical abilities, and you can't really set anything in stone, especially with a player of this age.
So he's 17. We'll see what the future holds for Christian Pulisic. Again, not with the U23s who fall to Colombia in Frisco, Texas, 2-1 on the night, 3-2 on aggregate. The result's not surprising, Brian. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a failure that the United States missed out on the Olympics for the second consecutive time, especially considering they had a chance to get it done against Honduras in Utah back in October. That's where the real failure lies. But this game was troubling, and I know you didn't get a chance to watch much of it because you were covering the senior team in Columbus. But this game was troubling in a couple of ways, mostly down towards the end when Luis Gil picks up a second yellow for really not his fault, but he had kicked a Colombian player to pick up the first one. Matt Miazga made a pretty bad mistake. There was some really naive moments for the United States, and we can get to the state of the program and what missing the Olympics means, et cetera, et cetera. But do you get the sense that there is something wrong in the attitude of some of the younger American players, maybe a new generation who hasn't been challenged, I suppose, in some way at the top level, or seems entitled to something. I mean, I don't like being old man with somebody on my lawn, but this is obviously not good just from a mental fortitude perspective.
No, it's not. I mean, look, the problem is this is a big failure for the team. I mean, Jurgen Klinsmann said that it was a top priority for 2015 to get this team to Rio. And they use such language as like, we can't lose another generation of young players. And on top of that, remember, they created the U21 team 2 years ago, which was going to morph into the U23 team. So they started this cycle 2 years ago, just with efforts to qualify. They invested a lot of time and money and resources into this team, and it failed. Now, look, U20 World Cups are a good indicator of talent, and usually it's that older U20 cycle, because there's two U20 cycles and one U23 cycle, if that makes sense, because it's one's every 2 years, one's every 4 years. And we're looking at the U20 team from 2013, and that team was not very good. I mean, they were blown off the pitch for the most part in Turkey in 2013, and that core pretty much stuck together. And lo and behold, it wasn't good enough then. It wasn't good enough now. And I think that the 2015 U20 team that was good, they were they were just too young at this point too. So I hope the mentality is very questionable, and it's not good, because you were hoping just familiarity with each other would get them through this, because they were together so much. But it wasn't, and you got to go back to the drawing board and look at each individual player. You got to look at how players progress with their clubs. Were there any players that they missed? If they missed them, why weren't they involved? And if there were players that they gave the keys to the team too early and then they never emerged, why did they overrate these certain players? These are questions that are going to have to be asked, not immediately, but this is a long-term question too. You got to kind of track these players and see where they go from failure. Mm-hmm. I mean, bad Olympic cycles can still produce very good players. So we'll see where they go from it. There was a couple bright spots in this whole thing. I thought Tim Parker was one, but not many. It was a bitter pill for them.
By the way, Tim Parker lucky to be on the field for the full 90 minutes after he had his own little stomping incident. Again, a frustration boiled over. Look, I understand a lot was put on these kids, especially in light of what happened in 2012. In Nashville, Brian, but to see this reaction, and again, I don't know that look, I don't know if it's Andy Herzog. I don't know if we want to put this on Jurgen Klinsmann, but as technical director, as the guy who's overseeing the senior team program, it is ultimately Klinsmann's responsibility to get these things working well. There may be talent, and I've seen some credit given to Klinsmann, certainly for maybe working out some of the dual international situations and maybe identifying a couple players. But generally speaking, these are guys who are going to be in this program regardless who was the head coach, just based on due diligence. So has he made any progress below the senior team level?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, dual nationals it's an interesting thing. It's helped the U.S. team. But it's not development. You're pretty much just, piggybacking off another country that develops these players. I mean, unless if you're dealing with a dual national like Matt Miazga, who was developed in the United States. I mean, if you look at guys like Keith Sweater-Brooks and all these other guys, I mean, you're piggybacking off other countries. It's not what we want. I mean, we welcome these players, but we want to see a technical director improve our own pipeline from within. It's too early to say, Klinsmann's failed at this. I mean, it's a long-term project. It's a long-term project. And when look, if you're dealing with a U23 player, they were 18 when Klinsmann came in, or below, around that age, 16 to 18. So, a lot of those players have already their development has been spoken for. So, but that being said, it's that final step. It's getting these guys in the right professional environment to go from a good youth player to a good senior player, because that's been the missing hurdle. Like, we have these youth. If you look at our U17 team, even the one that struggled at the World Cup, they get good results. Mm-hmm. They get very good results. It's a matter of then taking that youth level and then getting them into a good step in their career and being able to translate that over into becoming full adults. I mean, we're a little slow in that regard too, and a lot of questions have to be asked about development in terms of what players do in the first step of their career. and where they get their training, and that's a big jump, and mentally and physically and everything. So there's a lot of different question marks all up and down the developmental pipeline. It's too early to, like I said, too early to call Clemson a failure at this. But at the same point, though, it does fall under his watch, and he picked. He had a big heavy hand in staying in this Olympic team and the last Olympic team that failed too. So we have to look at why, and it might land on Clemson, it might not.
All right, so Brian, we've got the senior team now back in second place in their group, and looking like, as long as things go as we expect, and certainly we didn't expect to lose in Guatemala, but as long as things go the way we expect, things to be fine on that front. It is a matter of how well they're playing. Of course, Copa America comes between then and now. Clemson's not going anywhere. We all know that. I don't know that we've made our peace with it necessarily, but we've certainly have to accept that the Federation's not going to be making a change on that front anytime soon. So what is next for the program then? I mean, is there a sense from you that there needs to be greater pressure placed on Galati, placed on Jurgen Klinsmann? I mean, Klinsmann did seem to respond negatively in my mind, but he did seem to respond to some of that pressure this weekend.
Oh, of course. I think you saw a different lineup there for a reason. I mean, I think, it was, he wanted to put a different attacking lineup out there on the field last night, but you also saw guys like moves that made sense. DeAndre moving to right back, and Cameron moving in the middle, and Beckerman coming in and playing that role that really, he's played so well, and Clinton is, it's actually a big hole for the Nationals, and it's almost a point for another segment is who replaces Kyle Beckerman, because they play so much better with him on the field, but he's older. No one's really filled in that role yet, that strict defensive role. But
Brian, is that
and he got the result?
But is that Brian?
What is next?
Brian, yeah. Before you move on from the Kyle Beckerman role, is there do we really believe that Klinsmann's done a full job of trying to identify somebody to be that guy? I mean, in Guatemala it's Mix Diskerud. We know Nick Mix Diskerud's not playing that role. So
it's been elusive for him ever since. Ever since he Beckerman's flourished under Klinsmann. It's been Klinsmann's use of Kyle Beckerman has been one of the high points of his career. He didn't really find a role under Bradley, but he found a great role under Klinsmann. But now he's 33. So, but if you look at all the results of trying to find someone else to do what Beckerman does, has all failed. I mean, Jones and Bradley are free rangers. They don't really have that discipline. That Kyle sits there and knows what his role is, and Barry sits back. He's so disciplined in that role, and that's what it requires. Bradley and Jones don't do that. They tried Cameron there at the World Cup. That didn't really work. January camp. Danny Williams has been so inconsistent. And then he tried Tony Chani at January camp, but he bolted for Cameroon. So it's been very elusive there, and he's tried options if nothing's worked out, and that's going to be a big priority is to find Beckerman's replacement because they play so much better with Beckerman on the field. Beckerman, when you watch him in person, is completely different. I mean, his positional awareness is just fantastic.
No, he is other level in that way. But I guess what I'm saying is, I don't expect somebody to step right into Kyle Beckerman's shoes and do the job he's done. But at the same time, I mean, has Perry Kitchen gotten a full shot? I know he's just changed clubs, but has he gotten a full shot to really?
No, neither has Dax.
Dax hasn't gotten any look.
The most heir apparent.
Right.
I mean, he plays Kyle's role. The most identical to Kyle.
Exactly.
Anyone else out there.
Mm-hmm. So why not? Why not? I mean, this is again.
I don't know. I mean, Clemson says he's watching him, but we don't know what exactly that means. So I mean, I don't have an answer for it. I mean, I can't. You don't have opportunities all the time just to ask Clemson on each individual player he's not calling up. The answer is he's just not there yet, or he just doesn't rate him. But he certainly knows about him. So that's there's a lot of things that are going forward individually and big picture wise for Clemson too. Look, if the U.S. team falls flat at the Copa America on home soil for the second year in a row, failing on a home soil tournament, the mood is going to be pretty dour going into Russia, regardless of how they do in the X. I mean, it's such a big tournament. It's the biggest tournament on U.S. soil since the 1994 World Cup. They really have to put in a good performance here, or else the whole cycle could really be just surrounded by question marks of what if. I mean, no Confederations Cup and no real major competitions. No real pace of success in between that 4 years. It'll be a big 4 year gap of just nothing but people bickering about Clemson, and that just doesn't give you any kind of the positive momentum you need heading into a World Cup.
Yeah, certainly.
I see the Copa America as more crucial than most people realize.
Okay, fair enough. Whether or not these two games and last night for both the senior team and the U23s is a referendum on Klinsmann's tenure in a microcosm, certainly the Copa America will be the latest opportunity to sort of, the next opportunity to see if there's any real progress being made in the competition. I mean, I've got Roberto in my timeline right now, right now, Brian, asking if the United States should be worried because Paraguay, Costa Rica, and Colombia all did the business last night. Well, Paraguay drew with Brazil, but they were up 2-0 in that game. And to me, I mean, yes, of course, be worried about your opponents. But this is more about the United States and having, working through their internal issues and trying to figure out who they are. And Klinsmann put together a solid, consistent lineup that he can trot out there against anybody and have a reasonable hope that they're going to put in at least a strong performance that puts them in a position to maybe win if luck goes their way. That's the way I felt about the United States for many, many years, even if I had frustration over playing style and the like, Brian. I'm not sure I feel that way anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions. I mean, and unfortunately, you only get answers right, like when a team puts on an impressive performance, against a good team that really, American fans are savvier now, and media people are savvier now in terms of they're not going to get fooled by a win over Guatemala on home soil. So, and that's why I thought missing out on the Olympics is a big deal, because it's such a springboard into that whole team. And the opportunity to get some of these younger players international competition. I mean, look, I thought that when you look at the 2008 Olympic team, that was a magnificent springboard into 2010 for guys like Holden, Adu, Josie. It would have been Charlie Davies too, and they just don't have that now. Now you're just missing out on games and a chance to learn about your team and where guys fit in and and build trust between coaches and players and who can fill what roles. And so it's not just a big mystery too, because look, a lot of it, people talk about Clemson's uncertainty with lineups, but a lot of that has to do with how much can he trust players, and you need opportunities to trust players, and it's just like those are becoming fewer and far between without Olympics and Confederations Cups, and Arena and Bradley both had those at really key moments of their coaching tenure, and Klinsmann does not, and part of that might be his own. He has to answer for that as well, because he is a technical director. He assumed that role on his own free will, so it's fair to question him about it.
Brian Sciaretta, American Soccer Now. Go find all the coverage there that they've done on the USA recently. There's March 13th update to the ASN 100, which I've been looking at quite a bit this morning in the last couple of days. I'm sure there's some changes coming to that if the next time it comes around. Brian, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it in light of your travels. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, Jason. Anytime.
There goes Brian Sciaretta. Good stuff from him. Let's take a break. We'll come back. Phone lines will be open. Your thoughts on the U.S. men's national team, U23s, and the like at Soccer Morning, backheel.com.
Thank you for calling. Enter your 6-digit. Welcome, host. You are now in the host room and can manage your callers from the call-in studio web interface.
Welcome to Soccer Morning. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
All right, we're back on a Wednesday edition of Soccer Morning. Good stuff from Brian Sciaretta there. Lots to chew on as we talk about the U.S. men's national team coming out of a pair of qualifiers against Guatemala. Obviously, it's not all hunky-dory now that they've beaten Guatemala 4-0 and gotten themselves back into one of the qualifying places in Group C of CONCACAF qualifying. It's not like everything's great. We're not whitewashing all of the problems that this team will now, that this team still faces. We're not saying that everything is golden. Of course, I mean, even if you look at the goals last night, they sort of bumbled their way into a 4-0 win. I mean, it wasn't as though you had clear, dominant play that resulted in well-taken finishes of the clean, crisp variety. I mean, you had Clint Dempsey putting away a shot to open things up in a situation where the ball fell to him kindly. You had Jeff Cameron with a goal. That well taken. I suppose you could argue that one's fine. Then Graham Zusi tacking on a goal that really is all about the bad touch of Gyasi Zardes. In fact, Clint Dempsey's goal came from a bad touch. Gyasi Zardes ran fast. The ball hit him. It fell to Clint Dempsey. And then the final goal where there is no way Clint Dempsey meant to dribble that ball into the path of Josie Altidore as if it was a pass of some kind. That's not what that was. So even the goals themselves leave a lot to be desired. Let's go to Al in Missouri. Hey, Al.
Hey, what's going on this morning? I just want to talk about the highs and lows, mainly the low point. I'm very disappointed that the U.S. Under-23 team with that roster didn't make it to the Olympics and everything else. And it just feels like it's just it's just a wasted talent again.
Yeah, I mean, now those players are sort of in a limbo, right? I mean, this is what Brian Shaw was talking about, that the U23s in 2008 got that experience, got a chance to go play at a high-level tournament as a team as they were on the verge of breaking their way into the senior squad, right? Because now when you look at that group, I mean, some of those guys will be age-eligible for the U20s. There's a couple of guys who will come back around to even in the Olympics, but for the most part, we're talking about players who are in sort of a limbo.
Yes, Jordan Morris is going to be on the senior team. I hope we get to see him more, maybe in Copa America, and maybe during the Hex and everything else, because we need to develop, some more center backs on that roster too.
Wait.
Well,
we need to develop. Okay.
But another thing too, I saw a young team that was just imploded too at the end.
Yeah.
After they were down 2-1, they just said forget it. So what if we get a yellow card and everything else? They were just slide tackling.
That did frustrate me, Al, because what you had was a situation where, look, they knew that it was going to take 2 goals. A goal to tie the aggregate scoreline would do them no good because they would lose on the away goal tiebreaker. So at that point they needed 2 goals to get through, and there was just no way, based on the way the Colombians were dominating the ball and the inability of the Americans to create real chances. There's just no way that they were going to come back, and rather than responding to that in sort of a composed manner, not all of them, but there was a mental breakdown across that team that really was troubling. Guys throwing fits, stomps, leaving in legs on challenges, just being dirty. And the Colombians didn't make it better because they started time wasting and they started, acting like babies. But that's coming. Deal with it. Al, I got to run. You got anything else?
That's about it.
All right, man. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Al in Missouri, jumping on board. Let's go to Bill up in New York. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Jake, I'm glad you're talking about the under-23s and the lack of professionalism on that team. I mean, is there anybody on the team that's not a professional? And the way they played last night, and the stopping, like he said, Tim Parker, who was definitely the highlight of the 2 games.
Yeah,
he could have been the goal of the game at the end there, stomping on that guy.
Yeah, and that was pretty bad. Here's the thing. Alejandro Moreno, I kind of like him sometimes, but at the same time, I do think he's got he comes off like he's got a bias, like he's maybe not a fan of the U.S. programs. Being critical is maybe what it is, but when you're in the middle of watching your team fall and lose and melt down, you kind of don't want to hear Alejandro Moreno take shots, and yet he was spot on with Tim Parker. The guy should not have been on the field.
He was. And then him, Gill, and then even Miazga with the game before that, where he's kicking the ball away and he's getting a yellow card, a stupid yellow card in that game. This whole team, I know we all want to blame Jurgen and everything else, and I definitely want to blame Jurgen too. I'm on board with that. But these guys got to play. Yeah. You're professionals. Yeah. And the first game against Colombia, where it ended up being a 1-1 draw, and everybody was talking about what a good result that was playing down there. Colombia, it was like boys against men. They destroyed us down there. We were so lucky to get away with a 1-1 game, and I kind of felt that everybody was giving them a pass because we're playing this great Colombia team. Colombia is barely getting into the Olympics themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're not playing the best team in the world. We should have been going toe-to-toe with them, and we would have taken a 1-1 if we were toe-to-toe with them, but they destroyed us. They destroyed us in both games. We weren't even close. This team should be embarrassed by themselves, and then we're not getting any better. We're not going to play in the Olympics. These kids aren't going to get. I shouldn't call them kids because they're professionals. They're not going to get more quality games, and we're just going to start falling more and more behind. I feel.
Well, yeah. I mean, now there's a responsibility on the part of Klinsmann and Herzog and the people that are in charge of the program to figure out a way to make up for. You're not making up for the lack of an Olympic program, but a lot of teams, a lot of countries don't make the Olympics. Now it's a matter of finding ways to progress without that Olympic advantage. So I don't know, Bill. I mean, I want to be positive, especially in light of the response from the players and give them credit against Guatemala. But then we see the U23s, then we sort of recognize where this program is in general, and it's still hard to get enthused about things.
And now with the Guatemala game, I kind of feel that falls on Jurgen now. Because I think Jurgen, after the first game, he basically came out and admitted to me, at least watching it, that I screwed up the first game. And now I got to change. I got to bring in Zuzi. I got to bring in these guys. I have to change our line because I made mistakes. You've been with us for 2 cycles now. He shouldn't be making mistakes like that in that first game and putting out that squad and then panicking at the end of that game and just throwing guys in there to try to get a result. That was all on him. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing blame on everybody now after these 2 games for both teams, and I'm worried about our young guys coming up, and obviously I'm worried about our national team with Jurgen. I don't think he's doing a good job with these guys.
Yeah. All right, Bill. Appreciate the call,
Jason,
man.
Appreciate it.
All right, it's good stuff from Bill. Let's go to Patrick Clemson. What's up, Patrick?
Hey, how are you doing today, Jason?
We're trying to find a happy middle ground here. We're not. I'm trying really hard not to be doom and gloom, because look, the United States won a game and they won 4-0, and you have to be you have to be judicious with your criticism in that situation, and yet here we are, sort of still picking things apart, and the U23s obviously doesn't help.
Right. Well, I guess what I wanted to touch on almost sort of fits into some of that is, I guess you talked about this a bit last week, but the United States is in a place where it really feels like we don't have an identity right now, and we kind of lost that identity. And I think you kind of saw the 2 sides of that last night with the 2 different games. I mean, the first game against Guatemala, it really felt like a return to form for the USMNT national team, where it was very physical, direct. We did well on set pieces. It felt like, the kind of soccer that we're known for playing and grinding out and get our results. Whereas, the U23s definitely, especially under Klinsmann as also the technical director, just felt like they were still out of ideas under whatever sort of direction Klinsmann's got. And one of the things that just really got me thinking about this recently is I saw ESPN has a great 30 for 30 documentary about the USSR hockey team and all their rise to success on the international stage, from Russia being a country that barely played hockey at all to being, the great superpower. And one of the things that made them so loved and so successful among like bringing youth players in is that they played hockey on their terms. They played their own style. It wasn't the same as Canada or the United States. And when they got to the national stage, they didn't have success right away, but you could clearly see that they were their own thing. They had their own unique identity. And I guess that's still a question we have to be thinking to ourselves right now is, if we want this success, do we want to like reboot our system and just become a carbon copy of a Germany or some other team, or do we want to have success on our own terms? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I see what you're saying. And look, the former is almost impossible, right? I mean,
right.
If it was like that, we would have a situation, and maybe that's, just the nature of variance is going to create a situation where it's even hard to, like, is Belgium a carbon copy of anybody, or are they their own thing? That kind of thing.
Right.
It's while I may deride Klinsmann for some of the choices, while I may deride him for a lack of stability in the program, while I may deride him for his inability to accept responsibility in some cases, the thing that I do like about Jurgen Klinsmann is that he does have clear notions of what he thinks American soccer should be. I don't have to agree with those notions necessarily if there's progress, but I don't know that there is. So now we have a question of whether or not the United States needs to adjust its mentality about what it wants to be. I mean, the first ultimate question we have to answer as a soccer country is, what kind of soccer team do we want to have? Do we want to have a supremely technical side that passes the ball around the park, that plays, I mean, for lack of a better way of saying it, a Mexican style of the game? Because the Mexicans are very good at a technical soccer that plays very quickly, 1 and 2 touch passing. It's not tiki taka. It's a little bit more aggressive than that. At least getting the ball up the field. They're not going to lull you to sleep and then pick 2 or 3 passes. They will take their chances when they come in a sort of different a different sense. Or do we want to be something wholly different? And if we are going to be something wholly different, are we comfortable with being something different that may not be as on paper or on but from first visual inspection as quote unquote technical? Because I think we have you have an identity crisis in soccer in this country, where there's a large group of people, particularly younger group of people, who want us to be Spain. The problem is we're not Spain. We're very far away from Spain, and whether or not it's even a good idea to try to be Spain is an open question. And then you have, so what the United States does well doesn't fit in with the notion of what constitutes attractive, proactive, modern soccer, right?
Right.
Right.
No, I get all that. But, like, in my mind, I think there's definitely the approach that we should be looking at is not so much a total scrap and start over again of how we're playing, and more an evolution on what we already have. I mean, I don't think it's impossible for us to gain a little more attractive soccer, in terms of, how we're playing, maybe not be so scrappy, but still have the great identity that we're still going to be, the United States. We're still assuming we're the underdog just because that's how it's always been. And, we're going to really go for it on our set pieces, stuff like that's been successful for us in the past. And, I just don't think that, like, completely losing everything is going to do us any good, because it just doesn't feel like that's really true to anything. That just feels like, being so mechanical about it. And I think you're right. Jurgen Klinsmann definitely does have whatever his vision of wants American soccer to be. But, I just wish that there were more tangible things you could see that he's changed, especially, along the youth levels. I mean, he's been here for how long, and we've really heard no rumblings on changing a lot of the main things that people have gripes with about youth soccer, which is high school and college soccer. And those things are still operating the same way they were when Klinsmann got here. And those are two of the biggest things that, probably are going to have to change or be scrapped or restarted in some other form to really make any sort of change here. And that's, for me, is almost more frustrating than, all the tactics and everything. Is it like, I want to see actual change happen, and I just don't see it anywhere, other than maybe whatever's going on inside of U.S. soccer and their own youth teams. I mean, it just seems like outside of any of whatever they've picked out for their players, I don't see anything else happening, across the board.
Yeah. One of the issues here is, and I try to be as big picture as possible. That means I miss things. That means I'm not as informed about the grassroots level in different parts of the country as I might want to be. And maybe we need to dive into those things. But the reason I try to go big picture is because we talk about these things in these terms all the time. The way you're bringing it up, Patrick, and the issue for me is from this reserve perspective, you and I, and maybe what's happening in South Carolina, but beyond that, it's a mystery. We want to make these grand proclamations, things like, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but to say stuff like it's not changing.
No. I think that's totally fair.
Yeah, I mean,
like I said, it's hard to see. And
yes, exactly.
I just think it would be better if Klinsmann was out there, every week saying, here's XYZ we're doing, or if in his spare time he was at some youth camp in somewhere random across America, explaining things, that might be better, at least in terms of understanding what he's all about. And then maybe we have a more accurate assessment of whether we think Jurgen Klinsmann's ideas are good or not for American soccer.
Yeah. I mean, part of this is in maybe a more mature setup, these things are easier to determine, or maybe they're not. Maybe they become more subtle in that situation. Yeah. In an immature setup, because there's so much to take on, because the web is so complicated, you touch. I'm going to use the spider web as an analogy just because it came to my head. You touch something on one side of the web and it shakes everything. But if you're on the other side of the web, you don't know what caused that. You don't know what that was. Oh, everything's moving. What's moving? Why am I vibrating here? I think that we again. I deal a lot with people who call me up and say we need to do X, we need to do Y, we need to change Z. Coaches, kids, curriculum. Small-sided games, free play. I had a guy say 11 on V11 at the youngest age possible, which blew my mind. I mean, everybody's got an idea, and everybody wants it applied in grand scope, and that is in reality impossible. So now, if that's in reality, if that's impossible, how do you apply these ideas? Where do you apply these ideas? Do you take do you want like a canary in a coal mine situation and a couple of different places you apply something and then see how it works? Well, now are you doing right by everybody else if you're applying different standards? How is the youth club down the road 5 miles going to feel about that other club having a different sort of setup or a different, being brought along differently? I mean, the politics, the provincial attitudes, the old attitudes about how to play and how best to play, the winning at all costs, the pay to play. I mean, we could do this all day, Patrick, and we won't.
Right? Yeah, we could.
Oh, it makes your head hurt. It makes your head hurt. Yeah. And here's the thing. What I am convinced of is that none of these things individually are what is causing American soccer not to reach its potential, but as a whole, they all need to be addressed, or as a complete set of problems, they all need to be addressed. So we get distracted by talking about small-sided games at the age of 7, or kids playing with the ball more and not heading the ball when they're 7, or small-sided games versus big games versus indoor games versus, we get all distracted by these little tweaks and these small things, when what is our biggest issue, our biggest problem is that culturally we are so far behind anybody who, we are so far behind a nation like Colombia, culturally speaking, that we just toss it out the window like it doesn't matter. And I think that a lot of times it sounds like I'm making an excuse, but I don't think we can account for the fact that every single player on that Colombian team grew up in a household that was obsessed with the game on a level that maybe Americans just can't understand a lot of times. And we want to hold ourselves up. We care. I'm as passionate about the game as anybody. Well, are you really? I mean, did you roll the ball out for your 3-year-old and he's out front in the dirt kicking the ball around, learning how to play? Or did you wait until your kid was 5, sign him up for a rec league, take him out there with the other moms and dads, watch him run around some cones, and say, we're very passionate about soccer? You know, and it's not that we're doing anything wrong in the sense of the child's well-being or what is right as a society. We're not doing societal wrongs, but we might have some soccer wrongs that are built into how we deal with the game right now, because everywhere else that the game truly matters, it truly matters in ways that we are uncomfortable with. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And I think maybe part of that goes back to just maybe not even Jurgen Klinsmann, maybe just U.S. soccer in general. Just it doesn't feel to me like they are really out there, like involved in everything that's going on.
Well, but see, can they be?
An issue that,
but can they
I know
be?
You can't, but like
no. I don't mean they can't because it's too big of a problem. I mean, can they be involved in parts of the game in this country that are while culturally speaking we're well behind a lot, certainly the powers of the world. There is a truth that we have established structures here in the United States that are being run by people who have no interest in letting U.S. soccer tell them what to do at all. Or if they are, they're going to work on their terms. We're going to do things on our terms with U.S. Soccer. Yeah, you can come in and tell us about a curriculum, or we'll join your development academy, but we're going to do things our way. You know what I'm saying?
No, I know what you're saying, and I'd be shocked if that wasn't the response from whoever U.S. Soccer went to. But I don't know. I think just in general, like changing the sentiment about soccer may be the bigger issue.
Mm-hmm.
At hand.
Okay.
Like if U.S. soccer was focused on that, maybe not even necessarily telling people what to do, but how to approach the game and how much it matters, making sure it's fun for people, making sure that all those kids, in youth camps really care that the United States does well at a World Cup or a Copa America or at the Olympics or what have you, then I think that changes a lot. I mean, that's something I think I see a lot on the women's side of the game, because girls really, really do care about, United States women's national team. You'd be hard pressed for me to find some girl that's not done soccer at some point that isn't completely obsessed with all of them, following them on social media, X, Y, Z. And I think for them that's escalated almost to a similar level that, the men's team hasn't. And that's even just within, a niche population of the girls that are doing soccer, which, obviously has grown a lot in the past couple decades, but still, it's not what the men are.
No, but there's also the fact that the women are the best in the world. They won their first. They won World Cups when these girls were very young, were not even born yet. So the team itself was already a superstar on the world stage, which makes it way easier to jump on board. I mean, this is why we have American kids. They were born here. Their parents are American. Their connections to any other country are non-existent at this point through the family history, and yet they jump on board and become Brazil fans or Germany fans or England fans or whatever, because for them the fun is rooting for a good team, and the United States is not a good team. Right. Certainly not in the big picture. Not in the grand scheme of world football. So that is a problem. I don't know that we can quote unquote fix until it's a catch-22. It's a circular problem that the United States needs to figure out. For the girls' side of it too, for the women's game, one of the things that makes all of that possible is actually a bad thing, and that's that the club game on the women's side is so underdeveloped that it's criminal. It's criminal that the women's game is underdeveloped on the club side to that point. And hopefully we get we build up closer. But then that opens up again the question of, and I've asked this about the men's game in this country, whether or not we're moving towards club over country, and the women, that's well down the road. Hopefully NWSL last, and people form real bonds with their clubs. But as MLS gets to 20 years, as people have started to establish connections to English clubs and German clubs and everything else, Spanish clubs, I do get the sense that a tide is turning in the United States, and what once was a soccer culture driven by the senior men's national team is now a soccer culture driven by the club game.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally see that, and that's the scary future for some people that are soccer purists or what have you. But that may be a reality we have to live with. And at that point, maybe it doesn't even matter what the United States national team is doing, because it's all gone to the club game. So I don't know. these are all very hard questions to ask that, have answers that are pretty opaque. It's really hard to say a lot of these things until really buckle down and do something else. I certainly don't think at the very least what has been going on now or for the past 30 years has necessarily had a huge boom in the growth of the team. Other than having better organization, across the board, it just doesn't feel like the sentiment, like I said, has taken off in the way that I think U.S. soccer would hope it would, especially after some of the successes at the World Cup or, making a Confederations Cup final, XYZ, the sentiment still needs to change, especially with the small victories that we do have on the international.
I think it's absolutely true that we have a very large, pure number-wise fan base for soccer in the United States of America, maybe as big as any country in the world, barring a couple. But our fan base is more fractured than any in the world, by lots and lots. I mean, we have every stripe of fan, and rather than the national team being this unifying element, it does unify large portions of the fan base. Don't get me wrong, but not in the same way that we would see in most major soccer countries. So then, yeah, I mean that's direct to your point, Patrick, is whether or not U.S. soccer, and maybe it's only them because there's nobody else, have done a good enough job of trying to. Because rah patriotism only goes so far, right? So I don't know. It's a difficult thing.
Yep.
All right, Patrick. Appreciate the call, man.
I don't have. Yep.
I appreciate it. Sorry. There goes Patrick in South Carolina. I'm not sure we solved anything, but we had a good discussion there. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of Soccer Morning here on backheel.com. If you have questions, comments, concerns, hit us up on Twitter at Soccer Morning. If you want to get to me directly, it's Davis JSN. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll probably have more national team discussion. There'll be other things on the docket. We have a weekend of club soccer coming after the international window closes. It's all good and gravy. It's Soccer Morning. We'll see you then. Bye.